My name is Manfred Helber. I'm a Microsoft Most Valuable Professional in the category Cloud and Data Center. And I'm looking forward to not only explain to you what Azure Monitor is, but also to show to you how to configure it via Windows Admin Center for an Azure Stack HCI cluster. Azure Monitor is a very, very powerful monitoring solution, not only for your Azure workloads, but also for your applications, operating systems, Azure resources, Azure tenant information in Azure, and equal resources on premises. Azure Monitor provides us capabilities to bring metrics and log information to Microsoft Azure, to analyze this information, to visualize this information, and to respond. Respond is very important for many Azure Stack HCI customers because they want to receive information about specific information. So for example, if a hard disk fails, if a server fails, if an update in the cluster fails, or if any service is not up and running. And all this information is part of Azure Monitor. Azure Monitor is our powerful tool to provide this. When we look in detail at the matrix, then with the matrix, we are able to provide long-term information about, for example, usage of our clusters, usage of our resources, virtual machines, cores, and things like this. In the logs, we receive valuable information about our clusters and the status inside the cluster. For sure, with Azure Monitor, we can build powerful dashboard views to bring all the information we need on a single view, on a single page. With alerting, we can receive information automatically based on the status of a service or a server or a device in our monitored solution. Let's have a look at how Azure Monitor will work for Azure Stack HCI. In Azure Stack HCI, we know we have servers on premises with local drives. And these local drives provide our software-defined storage capacity with a high available configuration across the servers. But for sure, it's possible to connect these servers via monitoring agent to Microsoft Azure. And so if, for example, a disk drive fails in one of these servers, we will not only see it in the Windows Admin Center dashboard, because as you have seen in previous modules, we get status information in the Windows Admin Center dashboard about status of disks, of servers and services. But via Azure Monitor, we can provide an automated alerting, for example, via email. So before we implement Azure Monitor, the question is, what is the price for it? Because Azure Monitor is an Azure service, and as we have learned in the module about licensing Azure Stack HCI and workloads, in the licensing of Azure Stack HCI based on the cores of the physical nodes, we have included the operating system, but for additional Azure services and workloads, we have additional costs. Let's have a look at Azure Monitor. Azure Monitor is charged based on the amount of data that is analyzed via Azure Monitor. A detailed pricing is available via azure.microsoft.com/pricing/details/monitor. The interesting thing is, if you are monitoring a 2-node cluster, so this is not a promise what you can see on the slide, this is only an estimation of the costs you will have. The estimated costs of a 2-node cluster, where Microsoft expects about 1 megabyte logging volume per hour, the costs will be free. Because we have a specific amount of free capacity for Azure Monitor. The first gigabyte per billing account per month is free. So we have our Azure account, we have our Azure subscription, because we need to connect our Azure Stack HCI cluster there. If we activate Azure Monitor and we have a typical expected log volume for a 2-node cluster, we will not see any costs here, but this is again an estimation. This is not a guarantee. It depends on what you configure. Even for a 4-node cluster, we will not see any costs usually. Also for the 8-node cluster. So when do we expect any costs here? If you have a small deployment at a customer site with 3 2-node clusters, we expect 3 gigabytes of log volume. The estimated costs for Azure Monitor will be for free. If we have a medium deployment with 10 4-node clusters, okay, this is medium in the eyes of Microsoft. When I look at the German market, 10 4-node clusters are absolutely not typical. Most of the customers have a single cluster with 2 nodes, 3 nodes, 4 nodes. Some of them have a few new clusters. For sure, there are larger enterprises that have several clusters. But important for you is we have something like 10 gigabytes of log volume. The first 5 gigabytes are free of charge. This is the reason why we don't expect costs in the single cluster deployments. We will have costs of about $2.76 per gigabyte after the first gigabyte, so something like $13, $14 for this deployment. In a larger deployment with 25 4-node clusters, we expect 25 gigabyte log analytics volume for Azure Monitor. And again, the first 5 gigabytes are free of charge, and for the rest, we have costs per gigabyte. What's also important to mention, the data will be retained for 30 days. If you need a longer retention period, there will be additional charge per gigabyte per month. So the important message is, if you have a customer with a single cluster with Azure Stack HCI, where Azure Stack HCI is onboarded to Azure, and this customer already has the Azure tenant because the Azure tenant is required to onboard the Azure Stack HCI cluster, then usually there will be no additional costs for this small cluster, for this single cluster, if we enable Azure Monitor. And we have a lot of additional great features. So let's have a look at the live demo, how to configure Azure Monitor for Azure Stack HCI. The steps to configure it are found in the Windows Admin Center. I will connect to my Azure Stack HCI cluster here in the Windows Admin Center. And in the Windows Admin Center dashboard, I already mentioned, I get a lot of status information about my cluster. But it's not successful, or it's not planned that you sit all the time in front of the Windows Admin Center and look if everything is working. It's also not the plan that you always go to the drives and check if all the drives are up and running. The idea is that you will receive an alert if something goes wrong. And this can be configured in Azure Monitor. Please keep in mind that we already onboarded this Windows Admin Center to Microsoft Azure in the module where we have seen how to register Azure Stack HCI with Azure. Remember, when we go to the settings of the Windows Admin Center, I already have my Azure account here. This was already provided in the previous module. If you don't know how to onboard the the Windows Admin Center initially, then I recommend you to review the module about registering Azure Stack HCI with Azure and configuring Azure Arc. Because we already have prepared this, we can use the Windows Admin Center for our cluster, for our Azure Stack HCI cluster, and easily activate Azure Monitor without any additional onboarding steps. Remember the module where I showed you hybrid capabilities with Azure Stack HCI. You have seen the hybrid capabilities for the Azure Stack HCI cluster, and I showed also to you in this module the hybrid capabilities for single servers, so for the Azure Stack HCI nodes, and for Windows Server targets. For Azure Monitor for an Azure Stack HCI cluster, it's recommended to configure it in Windows Admin Center for the whole cluster, because I want to have the monitoring for both nodes, not only for node 1 or node 2. We want to have both nodes. And here, this is the default situation in Windows Admin Center. We can see here onboarding status is disconnected. And here we have a button to configure this cluster, to onboard this cluster to Azure Monitor. Let's select this option here, onboard the cluster. We can see the Setup Azure Monitor steps on the right-hand side. Keep in mind, you can configure all these Azure hybrid services also via the Azure portal. I could connect to the Azure portal. I could go to Azure Monitor, download the agent, configure the agent on the server nodes manually. It's much easier to do it via Windows Admin Center. My Azure subscription I want to use is the Azure sponsorship. I want to use an existing resource group. I have this Azure Stack HCI resource group here. It's in West Europe. I want to use a new log analytics workspace. We have seen this log analytics thing where we have seen this 5 gigabytes of included capacity or storage for each month. So let's see here, the log analytics workspace will be Azure Stack HCI log 01. Let's build something like this. We will use West Europe and the nodes are already onboarded to Azure Arc. Each of these hybrid services will check if we are already onboarded to Azure Arc. If not, we will see a recommendation to onboard to Azure Arc. It's strongly recommended, but it's not required here. The Microsoft Monitoring Agent and the Microsoft Dependency Agent will be installed on both target hosts. Let's check the two nodes before I click on Setup. I can open a new tab in Windows Admin Center, and let's take one of the nodes. I will take the Azure Stack HCI node 01. I will authenticate there. I need to re-authenticate because I started a new session here. And when I check for installed apps on the server, I will see actually I have the Azure Connected Machine Agent. It's for Azure Arc integration. Now let's set up the Azure Monitor, and let's check the status on the target server. Here we have an additional link. How much does monitoring and alerting cost? We discussed this via the presentation slides. Here you will get detailed information about this. Let's set up the Azure Monitor configuration. As we have seen in several previous videos, you will get a status information about setting up Azure Monitor in Azure. And this is great what Windows Admin Center does, because Windows Admin Center provides a script that configures the log analytics workspace in Azure, that downloads the agent, that distributes the agent across the node, and that connects this agent to Microsoft Azure to the log analytics workspace. So I save a lot of time, and I don't need this specific Azure knowledge, because when I think about my daily business, I'm very, very deep in the technologies around Azure Stack HCI, Storage Spaces Direct, Hyper-V. Yes, and I'm also working with Azure. But Azure, it's an as a service platform. We have nearly everyday new features. We have nearly everyday new configuration options. So if you are not working on a regular basis with Microsoft Azure and with specific features in Microsoft Azure, it can be hard to configure these things. And Windows Admin Center supports us here with an easy configuration wizard. I don't have to know how to configure this Azure Log Analytics workspace. I don't have to know how to download the agents and connect them. I only have to wait. Setting up Azure Monitor, this may take some time. And you know this from previous live demos. Sometimes you can read here, this may take some minutes or several minutes. Here we can see this may take some time. So it's a good idea to plan some additional tasks for this time. We can already check if something has changed already on one of the nodes. Let's just refresh here. No, the agent is actually not installed, and this will be installed in a few minutes. I will save us some time and skip this waiting time in the video and jump to the point where the configuration of the agent and the Azure Monitor has finished here. So we can skip this. Oh, we don't need to skip this because I was talking long enough here. Now we can see set up monitoring in Azure has successfully finished. Let's check what happened. Let's check the server node again. I will refresh the list and here what I mentioned. Now we have two new agents on both nodes. We have the dependency agent and we have the Microsoft monitoring agent. The Azure Connected Machine agent was already there. It was placed on the nodes for the Azure Arc enablement. So let's go back to the Azure Monitor. Here we can see, okay, we have onboarded the cluster with both nodes. Both nodes are connected. They are connected to the Azure Stack HCI log 01. So this is perfect here. This is our connectivity. And now it's important. This looks like everything is green. Everything is fine here. But we don't have any alert rules configured actually. So the log information is sent to Azure. Both nodes will collect this information and send this information to the log analytics workspace we have configured here. So this is already connected. So the agent information, we have this information here. The connectivity is connected, is up and running, everything's fine. But in this configuration situation, if we keep this, nothing will happen if an error occurs. So let's imagine a disk fails now. Then the disk failure will be in the log information will be transferred to Azure, nothing happens. I can find out in a later point of time, yes, today there failed a disk, or 3 years ago there failed a disk, but I will not have an alerting. To have the alerting, it's important to edit the alert rules here. It's a little bit hidden, but if you know it, you can click on it, edit alert rules. I mentioned that the Azure Monitor configuration for Azure Stack HCI in Windows Admin Center provides an easy configuration. So it's not necessary to go to the Azure portal now and configure some difficult log situations and values with the reactions. I only can select here and say, okay, I think it's relevant for me if the CPU utilization is over 85% for 10 minutes. Yes, it's relevant for me if the disk capacity utilization is for over 80% for 10 minutes. It's relevant for me if the memory utilization is available, the available memory is less than 100 megabytes for 10 minutes. It's relevant for me if the heartbeat is fewer than 2 beats for 5 minutes. It's relevant for me if there's a system critical error in the cluster event log. And it's relevant for me when I have an health service alert. So for example, disk failure, network failure, and things like this. Yes, I will all these options see here. If you say, okay, for me it's not relevant when the CPU utilization is above 85%, but I want to already know when it's above 70%, then you can customize these conditions. You can customize everything via the Azure portal. This is an easy default configuration way with the recommended settings we have in the Windows Admin Center. So what's also important, when we configure this, Azure will react if, for example, the CPU utilization is above 85% for 10 minutes, or if a disk drive fails, but we don't have an action condition. So when we now save this here, Azure will know, oh, there happened something where I should do something, but I don't know what to do. And this is why I have to add an action here. We can use existing action groups, or we can create a new action group. The action group could be Azure Stack HCI Action Group 01, and the email recipient could be Manfred, so my email address. It could be a distribution list, whatever you want to use there. So the email address of your cluster administrators, the persons that are responsible for managing and monitoring this cluster. And again, we have this learn about actions and action groups and manage actions links where we have a deep link directly into Azure. So when I open this one in a new tab, I get directly access to the Azure portal, to my log analytics workspace I've created, and I can set up alert rules here. But as you can see, I have a complexity here in the portal. I have activity logs, I have alert rules inside automation accounts. I don't want to use this at this point of time. I only want to save this via Windows Admin Center. And we can see I have to again to wait a few minutes till the alert rules in Azure Monitor are edited. So my Windows Admin Center sends a command to Azure and creates the alert rules here based on the default values. Successfully edited alert rules in Azure Monitor. And now several things will happen. I will receive an onboarding mail in the next few minutes. In this onboarding mail, I will see that I have activated Azure Monitor for this cluster. And then I will be notified via email whenever something happens here. And here's the new mail. I will show this to you. Let's have a look at this mail. You have been added to Azure Monitor Action Group. You are now in the Azure Stack HCI Action Group 01 Action Group. Notifications will send to the group. View details on Azure Monitor Action Groups. Here I have the information. So now I will be notified via email. For sure, I can again visit the Azure portal to view alerts, including alerts created in Azure, directly in the Azure portal. And this is great at these deep links. As we see, the Azure portal is really very powerful, but also very complex. So it's easier for me to be routed directly to the target element here. So we have, for example, seen this here, where I had the alerts, and I can refresh the list here of the alerts. You can see, okay, there we can build our own alerts, even if there are the default alerts created based on the Windows Admin Center configuration here. We can also use the Analyze System Health, the Query and Analyze Logs, and Alerts and Actions on the right-hand side. So these are all direct links to the Azure portal. Let's start with the Azure Monitor for VMs. Here we will be linked directly to the Azure portal where we can see, okay, virtual machines. And here we have our nodes. Here we have our cluster. Here we have an information that there's an upgrade available for this machine here. I can click through to get detailed information. And here you can see, oh, great, this is a map where you can see there are 2 clients that are connected to this machine. It's the Azure Stack HCI 01. It's the 02 machine here that is connected. And we are using port 80. These are 3 servers. We have the port, this one here is the port 445. We are using the port 443 and so on. So this also provided by the Azure Monitor that we can see what happens here, which communication is open there. And here we can, for example, see there are several connections to Microsoft Azure. We have here an Azure Arc connectivity to West Europe. We have an Visual Studio Services. This is a website I've opened on this machine to have access to my registration keys and so on. You can all see this in the Azure Monitor portal. I don't have to navigate here because maybe I don't know where to find this specific configuration. I can just click on Azure Monitor for VMs. I will be directly linked to the portal and get this really powerful and great information here. For sure, I also have this information for my cluster. I have also this information for my servers. So when I go back to the Windows Admin Center portal, I can query and analyze logs. Let's have a look at this. It's again opened in the Azure portal. So it's not the idea to bring this to the Windows Admin Center because this makes Windows Admin Center too complex. So if we want to use additional features, we are linked to the Azure portal where we have the full functionality, like for example, querying the logs with here additional training material, because as you can imagine, I have a lot of information in these logs and maybe it's not always self-explaining. And so I get, for example, information about page view trends, top browser exceptions, and so on. And I can take this top query things here to filter my logs. And the last one, configure monitoring and alerts from Azure portal. We have there been previously in this list. And here we can see, okay, we have no fired alerts actually. If we check the alert rules, we can see these are actually the alerts I have configured on premises. In the Windows Admin Center, they are enabled. For example, the memory utilization here with the values provided, here with information about the action group name and the information description. Available memory is less than 100 megabytes. You can customize this information here. You can define the email subject. You can include details in the alert rule to have some self-explanation if somebody receives this email here. So if you want to customize this, this is configurable. We have additional properties here in the properties for this memory utilization configuration. We have the frequency here in the schedule. We have the source text. We have additional tasks we can configure to maybe have some automated actions if this happens. So it's really, really very powerful. Let's have a look at the mail I prepared where I received such an Azure Monitor alert previously. In this Azure Monitor alert, I received an Azure Monitor alert that was triggered because we had only one heartbeat in the last 5 minutes. I get detailed information. I have fewer than 2 beats for 5 minutes. It was only one heartbeat in the last 5 minutes. I have the information of the number of heartbeats, and I have the information about the cluster or the server that is based on this alert, maybe in a warning state or in a critical state. With clicking in View Results, it can get the detailed information, and I can jump into the Windows Admin Center to maybe have a dashboard view onto my servers to check if something is going wrong. Then I can go actively to the dashboard to verify this, to validate this situation, and I can try to fix the issue I received in this email. So Azure Monitor is really great. And with the knowledge that the costs are maybe not existent in smaller clusters or very, very low, I would absolutely recommend you to onboard Azure Monitor. It's a really powerful extension for your Azure Stack HCI cluster.